September 23, 1803. Midday on an Indian plain near the village of Assaye. Major-General Arthur Wellesley's horse collapses beneath him, shot through by Maratha artillery. He's 33 years old, commanding 4,500 British and Indian troops against 50,000 Maratha warriors, supported by over 100 cannons. The odds are worse than 10 to 1. His officers begged him not to attack. Every military manual says, wait for reinforcements just 6 miles away. But Wellesley spotted something in the terrain nobody else noticed, made a decision in seconds that would define his entire career, and launched an assault that should have ended in catastrophe. By evening, 35% of his force would be casualties, the bloodiest battle Wellington ever fought. But the Maratha army would be shattered, 98 cannons captured, 2 enemy commanders dead. Decades later, as the Duke of Wellington, after defeating Napoleon at Waterloo, he'd call Assaye his finest achievement. Not Waterloo, not Salamanca. This battle in India, where he had 2 horses shot from under him and won against impossible mathematics. The question is whether this was tactical genius or a gamble that happened to succeed. To understand Assaye, you need to grasp what the British were actually facing in 1803. The Maratha Confederacy wasn't some disorganized tribal force dolt, was India's dominant military power, controlling territory larger than France. Daulat Rao Scindia commanded armies that included regular infantry battalions trained by French officers, over 100 European-style cannons served by skilled gunners, and cavalry formations that could ride circles around British columns. His company's Franchise regular battalions drilled in European linear tactics, dune jot in proper formations with disciplined musketry. These weren't irregulars with outdated weapons. They were professional soldiers who'd conquered most of central India through military excellence. The Maratha military system combined traditional Indian cavalry warfare with modern European artillery and infantry doctrine. Their light cavalry conducted lightning raids across vast distances. Their heavy cavalry delivered shock charges, and their artillery parks rivaled anything the British could field. French officers, many veterans of revolutionary wars, commanded Maratha regular units and had trained them to European standards. When Marathas deployed for battle, they formed proper lines, maintained reserves, and coordinated combined arms. The Mughal Empire was collapsing, leaving a power vacuum across India, and the Marathas had filled it through sophisticated military organization. Into this situation stepped Major-General Arthur Wellesley, younger brother of Governor-General Richard Wellesley, who was pursuing aggressive British expansion. At 33, Arthur commanded approximately 10,500 troops do mix of British redcoats and Company Sepoys Deungith orders to eliminate Maratha power in the Deccan. He'd already proven himself at Seringapatam in 1799, but this was different. The Marathas weren't defending a fortress. They were a mobile field army that had been avoiding decisive battle for weeks, retreating northward whilst harassing British supply lines. By late September, Wellesley was frustrated. The monsoon rains were approaching. If he didn't force a battle soon, the campaign would end inconclusively and the Marathas would remain a threat. Then, on September 23rd, his scouts brought intelligence. A large Maratha force had been spotted near the village of Assaye. Wellesley made an immediate decision. He'd march with a flying column, dull-beaving his baggage and slow-moving elements behind, de-enforce the engagement before the Marathas could slip away again. He took roughly 4,500 combat troops, British cavalry, Highland infantry, sepoy battalions, and 17 guns. It was half his available force, but it could move quickly. What Wellesley didn't know was that he was marching toward not 30,000 Marathas as reported, but closer to 50,000, with an artillery train that would make his 17 guns look pathetic. He was about to face the kind of odds that ended careers and destroyed armies. Morning, September 23rd. Wellesley's column marches north toward reported Maratha positions. He expects to find them on the north side of Assaye village, positioned for retreat if necessary. The British force moves fast, cavalry screening ahead, infantry in column, artillery struggling to keep pace in the heat. Then around midday, Wellesley crests a ridge and discovers the Marathas have repositioned overnight. They're not where intelligence placed them. They're south of the village, between two rivers Dubshe Kaitna and the Juardeolne, an extraordinarily strong defensive position. Their front faces south toward Wellesley's approach. Their left flank anchors on Assaye village. Their right flank sits protected by the river confluence, and stretched across that front are over 100 cannons with 50,000 warriors formed behind them. Wellesley studies the position through his telescope whilst his officers gather, waiting for orders. It's a nightmare tactical situation. Attacking frontally means crossing perhaps 1,000 yards of open ground under fire from artillery that outnumbers his guns 6-1. The Maratha position is nearly perfect, rivers protecting flanks, village anchoring one end, clear fields of fire across their front. Colonel Maxwell, commanding the cavalry, suggests waiting for Stevenson's column 6 miles south. Double the force, better odds. But Wellesley knows the Marathas have spent weeks avoiding battle. If he waits until evening, they'll slip away in darkness. The campaign fails. Then Wellesley notices something others have missed. 2 villages sit directly opposite each other across the Kaitna River Dulhi Pulgaon on the south bank where he stands, Warur on the north bank. Why would villagers build settlements facing each other across a river unless they regularly crossed between them? There must be a ford connecting them, even though he cannot see it from his position. If that ford exists and is passable, he can cross the Kaitna there, approach the Maratha right flank instead of their prepared front, and achieve some element of surprise. It's a deduction based purely on village placement. He has no reconnaissance confirming the ford is there, or whether it's usable for an army. Wellesley makes his decision in perhaps 30 seconds. We cross here, and attack immediately. Maxwell stares at him. They cannot see any ford. The river looks deep and fast-flowing. Wellesley's response is pure confidence or absolute madness. The villages prove the ford exists, form the army for attack. He's gambling 4,500 lives on architectural logic. If he's wrong about the ford, his army either drowns attempting to cross or gets massacred while strung out along the riverbank. If he's right, he outflanks a position that's otherwise unassailable. There's no middle ground. It's brilliant tactical thinking or catastrophic miscalculation, and they'll know which within the hour. 1:30. The British advance guard reaches the Kaitna River. Wellesley's gamble pays its first dividend. Dubshe Ford exists, but it's deeper than anyone hoped. The water runs chest-high on infantry, the current is strong, and the rocky bottom makes footing treacherous. The 19th Light Dragoons plunge in first, 400 cavalrymen on horses that are half swimming through the deeper sections. They emerge dripping on the north bank and form a screening line whilst the infantry begins crossing. The 78th Highlanders wade in next, 600 Scotsmen holding their muskets overhead to keep powder dry, water reaching their chests, each step fighting the current. They're completely exposed. If Maratha artillery was positioned here, they'd be slaughtered like cattle. But the Marathas didn't expect anyone to cross at this point. They're scrambling to redeploy, wheeling guns and moving infantry to face this new threat. Wellesley's surprise has bought precious minutes. The 74th Highlanders follow the 78th across. Then the sepoy battalions, wading through with the same discipline as the British regulars. Artillery crews struggle to manhandle guns through the ford, horses straining against the current. By 2 o'clock, the British are deployed on the north bank in proper linear formation, Dubswow ranks deep, red-coated Highlanders on the right, sepoy battalions in their company uniforms on the left, cavalry on the far right flank. And that's when the Maratha artillery finds its range. Over 100 cannons open fire from 1,000 yards. Round shot screams through the British formations. The distinctive whistling shriek, then the impact-due 6-pound ball of iron moving at supersonic speed tears through 3 or 4 men standing in line. Holes appear in the formations, immediately closed as rear ranks step forward over the bodies. Officers shout to maintain dressing. More shots, more men falling. The Marathas have had time to position perhaps half their artillery to face this unexpected threat. The British have 17 guns answering, hopelessly outmatched. Wellesley sits on his horse watching the deployment, calculating rapidly. If he stands here trading artillery fire, his 17 guns against their 100, basic mathematics destroys his army. Each minute of bombardment costs casualties whilst achieving nothing. He must close the distance quickly, get within musket range where British infantry can bring their disciplined volleys to bear. At 300 yards, Martini Henry muskets become effective. At 100 yards, they're devastating. But to reach that range, his men must walk across 1,000 yards of open ground under continuous artillery fire. There's no other option. Wellesley gives the order. General advance. 4,500 men begin marching toward 50,000. Drums beating the step, colours flying, walking into systematic destruction with parade ground precision. The Maratha gunners increase their rate of fire, pouring shot into the approaching formations. Men fall. The ranks close up. The advance continues. Section 5, 2:30. The British line has closed to 300 yards, and the character of the battle transforms. Maratha infantry Dubsho's French-trained regular battalions in European formations dulpen musket fire. Now it's not just artillery, but volleys crashing across the narrowing gap. The 74th and 78th Highlanders on the British right advance toward the Maratha centre, taking fire from infantry and artillery simultaneously. Smoke begins obscuring the field, hanging thick in the still afternoon air. At 200 yards, officers give the command. Halt, present, fire. The British volleys rip out in coordinated sections, one rank firing whilst the other reloads. The training shows immediately Diugritish rate of fire exceeds the Maratha regulars. Reload, present, fire. Mechanical discipline born from endless drilling on parade grounds. The formations close to 100 yards. Now men can see faces before pulling triggers. The Maratha infantry are fighting well, holding their ground, returning fire in disciplined volleys. These aren't irregulars breaking at first contact, Dubshire professional soldiers trained by European officers. But the British two-rank line puts more muskets to bear than the Maratha formations, and that mathematical advantage tells in bodies falling. The smoke is so dense now that soldiers aim at muzzle flashes rather than seeing their targets. Officers and sergeants shout to maintain formation. Bayonets fix. The lines crash together in sections where the firing has weakened one side or the other. Meanwhile, the village of Assaye on the Maratha left has become a separate battle, British troops clearing it house by house, Maratha irregulars defending from rooftops and doorways. Brutal close quarters fighting with bayonets and Tulwar's Julndian curved swords that can take a man's arm off. The Highlanders push through room by room, clearing each building before moving to the next. By 3 o'clock, Assaye village is taken, but the cost has been terrible. Then Wellesley, directing the battle from horseback in the centre of his line, rides toward the crisis developing on his left flank. The sepoy battalions under Picton are holding their section of line against Maratha regular infantry, but Maratha cavalry Dubshusens of Horsemen massing for a charge against this flank. If they break through, the entire British line gets rolled up from the side. Wellesley is assessing how to counter this threat when his horse suddenly staggers. Shot through the chest by musket or artillery, duel the chaos, nobody knows which. The animal collapses. Wellesley hits the ground hard, rolls clear, comes up with dust covering his uniform. Within seconds, an aide has brought another horse. Wellesley mounts and continues directing the defence as though nothing happened. But every soldier nearby has seen their general thrown from a dying horse and immediately returned to command. That image steadies men who are wavering under the pressure. The fighting around the Maratha artillery positions has become nightmarish. British infantry are reaching the gun line, where Maratha gunners fight with ramrods, handspikes, anything they can grab. Some gunners are literally chained to their cannons to prevent retreat. They die at their posts rather than abandon their guns. 4 o'clock. The battle reaches its crisis. On the British left, those massed Maratha cavalry launch their charged Dubshausans of horsemen, thundering toward Picton's sepoy battalions. The sepoys form hasty squares, 4 ranks facing outward with bayonets bristling like porcupines. The cavalry crashes into them, probing for gaps, but the squares hold through sheer discipline. Wellesley commits his only reserve, the 19th Light Dragoons. 400 British cavalrymen charging against thousands of Maratha horse. It's mathematical suicide, but it might buy the infantry enough time. The dragoons crash into the Maratha cavalry with sabres raised. For perhaps 5 minutes, shock and aggression carry them through the first Maratha line. Then the numbers tell. The Maratha cavalry reforms, surrounds isolated groups of dragoons, cuts them down with tulwars and lances. The survivors retreat, having purchased 10 critical minutes with their blood. Wellesley rides directly into this collapsing flank, directing reinforcements, steadying wavering units through personal presence. Then his horse is shot again. Second mount killed beneath him in the same battle. He crashes to the ground for the second time, this time landing amongst the sepoy infantry who watch their commander thrown, see him immediately stand, brush himself off, and mount a third horse within seconds. The psychological impact is immense. If the general can take 2 horses being shot and continue calmly, perhaps the situation isn't as desperate as it feels. But something critical is happening across the Maratha line. Multiple senior officers commanding their regular battalions have been killed in the brutal exchange of fire. The European officers training and leading the company's franchise are falling as casualties, and with them goes Maratha coordination. Different units begin acting independently, without the command structure tying them together. The British pressure remains relentless. Dubsho's disciplined volleys keep crashing out. The Highlanders keep advancing, and the sepoys on the left hold, despite the cavalry threat. By 4:30, sections of the Maratha line are fragmenting. Some regular units are breaking toward the rear. Others fight stubbornly in isolated positions. The Maratha irregular cavalry begins streaming away from the battlefield, recognizing that the position is collapsing. British and native cavalry pursue, cutting down fleeing warriors. The Highlanders break through the Maratha gun line, capturing cannon after cannon. Maratha gunners who haven't fled die fighting at their pieces. The British are capturing the entire Maratha artillery park, dualtinity 8 cannons in total, nearly the enemy's complete train. The slaughter phase begins as the Maratha line disintegrates. Warriors flee toward the Juar River, trying to escape across the water. British cavalry pursues them to the riverbank and beyond. This is where Maratha casualties mount most rapidly. Estimates will eventually place Maratha dead at over 6,000, with thousands more wounded. But the British haven't escaped lightly. Wellesley's aide delivers the butcher's bill. 456 British soldiers killed or wounded, 1,128 sepoys killed or wounded. Out of 4,500 engaged, 1,584 are casualties, 35%. 1 in 3 men who crossed that river this afternoon is dead or wounded. It's the bloodiest battle Wellington will ever fight relative to numbers. 6 o'clock. The sun sets over Assaye, and Wellesley sits on his third horse surveying a battlefield covered with bodies. The Maratha army is shattered, fleeing in all directions. His force has captured 98 cannons, killed 2 senior Maratha commanders, and achieved complete tactical victory. But the cost makes him physically ill. 35% casualties. At Waterloo 12 years later, British casualties will be 15%. This is more than double that rate. He'll later write it was the bloodiest for numbers I ever saw, and call it a terrible day. Yet strategically, it's decisive. The Maratha Confederacy's military reputation is broken. Daulat Rao Scindia will be forced to negotiate, ceding territories including Agra and Delhi. The path to British dominance in central India is open. Why did the British win against such odds? Not superior numbers, Dubshi were outnumbered 10-1. Not superior artillery, Dubshi had 17 guns to the Marathas' 100+. They won because Wellesley spotted a ford that others missed, crossed it before the Marathas could react properly, and then maintained relentless offensive pressure through discipline that never wavered. The sepoy battalions fought as courageously as the Highland regiments do, fact often overlooked in British accounts, but critical to the victory. The Marathas fought hard, especially their regular infantry. Their gunners, chained to their weapons, died at their posts rather than retreat. But when their European officers fell and command structure fragmented, they lost coordination, whilst the British maintained cohesion. Decades later, the Duke of Wellington would be asked about his greatest battle. Not Waterloo, where he commanded 68,000 against Napoleon's 72,000, with Prussian reinforcements arriving. Not Salamanca or Vittoria or any peninsular triumph. He'd answer, Assaye. Because at Waterloo, he fought from a defensive ridge with near equal numbers. At Assaye, he attacked across a river with 10-to-1 odds against him. At Waterloo, if things went badly, retreat was possible. At Assaye, there was no retreat routed Elgust, win or die. Wellington understood that Waterloo was brilliant defensive generalship, but Assaye was offensive audacity that defied every military principle and succeeded anyway. What did Assaye teach the young Wellesley that shaped the Duke of Wellington? That terrain analysis could overcome numerical disadvantage. That aggressive maneuver created opportunities impossible, mathematics said, didn't exist. That personal leadership at crisis points, duging visible, being calm, whilst horses died beneath Udil Sattered more than tactical genius on paper. And most importantly, that victory had a price measured in bodies, and sometimes that price was so high, it questioned whether the objective was worth the cost. The 35% casualties at Assaye haunted Wellington. It's why in Spain and at Waterloo he preferred defensive tactics. Offense won battles, but defense preserved armies. Yet when asked decades later about his finest achievement, Wellington chose the battle where he'd gambled everything on a ford he couldn't see, where he'd had 2 horses shot from under him, where 1 in 3 of his soldiers fell, because he knew how easily it could have ended in catastrophe rather than triumph. So how did 4,500 British and Indian troops defeat 50,000 Marathas at Assaye? The answer isn't technological superiority or inherent British advantage. Dubshi Marathas had better artillery, equal training in their regular units, and overwhelming numerical superiority. The answer is a 33-year-old general who looked at 2 villages facing each other across a river and deduced a crossing point nobody else saw, who then gambled his entire force on that deduction, crossed under potential fire, deployed under actual bombardment, and maintained offensive pressure through discipline, whilst accepting casualties that would have broken most commanders' nerve. Wellesley's tactical genius at Assaye was recognizing that all his options were terrible, then choosing the least terrible and executing it perfectly. Attacking frontally meant suicide. Waiting for reinforcements meant the Marathas escaped. Retreating meant campaign failure. The invisible ford was the only option that offered even a possibility of success, so he took it. When that gamble succeeded, he didn't hesitate. Dude pressed the attack immediately, crossing the killing ground quickly to bring British musketry into effective range where discipline could overcome numbers. But look at the cost. 1,584 casualties out of 4,500 engaged. Wellesley never forgot that butcher's bill. It shaped everything that came after. In the Peninsular War, he'd become famous for defensive tactics dughoosing ground carefully, making the French attack him, preserving his army whilst bleeding theirs. At Waterloo, he'd perfect that defensive art, holding a ridge whilst Napoleon exhausted his forces against it. That cautious Wellington was forged at Assaye, where offensive brilliance cost 1 in 3 soldiers. Yet 4 decades later, after Waterloo had made him the most celebrated general in Europe, Wellington still called Assaye his finest achievement. Why? Because Waterloo was repeatable Dunhood position, disciplined troops, sound tactics. Assaye was unrepeatable. It required everything going right in a situation where everything should have gone catastrophically wrong. The ford had to exist. The Marathas had to react slowly. The left flank had to hold against cavalry. The command had to maintain cohesion despite appalling losses. Remove any single element, and Wellesley's army is destroyed. The Marathas fought with courage equal to the British. Their gunners died chained to cannons. Their regular infantry matched European-trained troops in discipline. Their cavalry nearly broke the British flank. They lost, because their command structure shattered when key officers fell, whilst British cohesion never wavered. That's not racial superiority. That's the outcome of whose command system proved more resilient under extreme pressure. Assaye proved that Arthur Wellesley possessed something beyond tactical competence. He had the ability to see solutions others missed, the courage to gamble everything on his judgment, and the leadership to hold an army together through impossible circumstances. That day in India, fighting an enemy most Britons had never heard of, a young general demonstrated the genius that would eventually defeat Napoleon. Wellington knew it. That's why, remembering all his victories, he chose a Assaye battle that should have been impossible, but wasn't.